Okay, so I think I will jump in. Um, Welcome, everyone. I'm not sure exactly who's here, but we're here and ready to talk about data and the end-to-end roadmap. My name is Mary Jane Dykeman. I'm a managing partner at a law firm in Toronto called Inc. Law. And we have been practicing health law primarily for quite a long time. I don't even want to say how long. Let's just say long enough that we had an opportunity to be instrumental in developing health privacy legislation here in Ontario, which is where I am today. And over the years, lots of data issues, privacy issues, working with healthcare institutions. Eventually, my law partner, Carol Piovesan, which, she's a tremendous AI lawyer, frankly. If you have any opportunity to tune in at some point and listen to her, she was a litigator by training and then eventually decided to move over, teach herself AI, engaging with the machine learning and data science types and everything else. And we've had a wonderful time over the past probably 3 years. We joined our practices, formed Inc. It is the same law firm, but it has evolved such that we're doing corporate commercial law day-to-day, general health law, and then also all of the data law. So privacy, data governance, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and the like. And to my mind, that's some of the most exciting stuff that's available. And so we practice law in Inc. Law. And then we also have a consulting company called Inc. Consulting. And we also are a startup because we have our Canary tool, which I'll mention just in passing. This is not a sales pitch by any means, but we're really intrigued by risk impact. And I've been an in-house lawyer to a number of hospitals over time and always wearing that risk management lens, whether it's a clinical issue, we've got something really unusual unfolding, but also with the data issues as well. And so I'm also splitting my time this minute. I'm here with you today from the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is a large teaching hospital in Toronto. And I just stepped in a couple of weeks ago to help them out as the interim vice president, legal, and I have to think about the title, chief legal and risk officer as well. But you can imagine that a lot of these organizations are taking on the data issues. I think here there's a brain data bank type initiative underway. So I'm really looking forward to being back in this kind of role, even part-time, for a few months until we hire, because these things are happening in real time. There are repositories being built across every sector. And again, depending on where you are focused, I built this presentation really to talk about the end-to-end data journey, but keeping in mind that some of you may be starting out in a variety of fields. Some of you are with organizations that are starting to look at data and what to do, and then is somewhere in the middle. If something you hope to do is to serve some of the organizations and they are hesitating about their data, what are the tips, frankly, to give the reassurance that yes, we should move this forward? Maybe you have a tool that you are building or a service that you're offering, and you really need to almost calm the nerves of the organizations that will have some hesitation. So obviously some organizations are way out ahead. They embraced it. They decided they would do it, sometimes even faster than lawyers and privacy people would want them to do it. But we're going to talk about risk appetite as well. So again, depending on where you're coming from, whether you're considering a career, whether you're 25 years into a career, depending on whether you're offering the service, building the tech, just thinking again about what organizations and companies are nervous about. I spent a lot of time with boards of companies and public sector organizations as well. And I think a lot of groups feel that they should be doing something about data. For example, they're spending some time talking about cyber, because cyber suddenly, I know it's not super sudden, but cyber is where risk comes home. and suddenly you're living it, or a peer organization gets hit, and boards will sometimes stop a meeting and then say to me, well, could it happen to us? And I think, well, first off, I'm not the security person, so let's get that group in as well. But part of my role is to also give it that broad lens and sort out, are we layered in our diligence? Are we putting the right things in place? But the reason I wanted to do the end-to-end roadmap is really because, there's privacy, which is bread and butter work to us. We're turning terms of use and privacy policies and strategies around privacy and responding to breach and everything else. And that's fine. We know, I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislative reform, which again, sounds a bit boring, but because some of it's going to include autonomous decision-making and the like, and we're starting to see more of this, it's important. So privacy is always going to be a baseline, is going to be important. Cyber is going to be important because we need to know where our data is and we need to make sure it's secure. But I'm going to treat those almost as the entry point of building this roadmap for the data. And I'll also mention, again, in this roadmap, I recall Carol and I, again, this would have been ahead of COVID. I'm sure we're all losing our sense of time somewhat. But ahead of COVID, we were on the stage in both Orlando and Barcelona with Gartner, the global advisory group, for one of their IT symposiums. Two of them, I guess. And we were with a group of global CIOs in the room, and we were walking through artificial intelligence. And you can imagine, even 2.5 years ago, again, it was the fall of 2019, so not even 3 years ago. Consider, even at the time, there might have been 84 or so ethical frameworks for AI. The legislation had not made an appearance. We were watching global developments. We were building some of what we were doing based on, some of these emerging issues and best practices and everything else. And we walked through some case studies with them, the fundamentals of machine learning and AI. Again, we're not the technical people, but we're having this conversation about artificial intelligence and harnessing the data and creating use cases and everything else. And even with this highly sophisticated group of global CIOs, one of them came up to us after the fact and said, I'm scared to do anything and I'm scared to do nothing. And I thought, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. So again, without the full benefit of knowing what each of you is doing, what is your plan for data governance, cyber, but particularly the machine learning and AI and every opportunity that's there. Part of what I want to do today is just really talk about that mindset of some of the organizations. And again, if you're in an organization and these conversations are happening, or maybe they're happening really fast and pushing ahead, but maybe they are at the earlier stages. And I've heard organizations and companies say, well, maybe it's not us yet. We can watch to see what the sector would have us do. Maybe other people could go out ahead and lead. And as you know, some other companies want to be first out the door and move really quickly on these things. Some of them perhaps will never get there. And in some ways, that's the other thing I wanted to close up with in a short while. Maybe it isn't for everyone either, or more likely, maybe it's not that everyone has to build it from scratch. Maybe there are other groups out there, whether it's their peer that then commercializes and starts to sell technology or the service or both. Because not every organization or company is going to embrace it. They may come to the point where they think, okay, we do need to do this because there's a competitive advantage. And we'll talk about how machine learning and AI really can provide that, but it's almost not for the faint of heart. So let me jump in. Any questions or comments? Is there anything I need to do before we jump into that and just think
I
about
was
the time?
just not sure if you were actually can you try to show me the next slide? Just want to make sure
Oh,
that
of
it
course.
actually works.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Because I wasn't
we're in
sure
business.
if if you're showing like
I'm
something
driving
else.
the slides or you are? Yeah.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
think,
Okay.
if
No,
I'm not
no, no,
mistaken,
no questions so far.
Okay.
So it was
Okay.
a
So
long
let's just
intro.
jump in. If at any point I pause it, it's because there could be, an overhead alert, but I don't hear anything. So we'll just carry on from here. So ground level, I think we always have to go back to the individual, the public, and whether they are a client, a consumer, in my world, often a patient or client of a healthcare organization or resident of a healthcare organization, if it's a residential thing like a long-term care home or whatever setting that is. Let's just go down to the basics. This is somebody's data. And we can have whatever debate we want about, oh, well, is that the most sensitive data? Is financial information the most sensitive data? Is health information the most sensitive data? Ultimately, let's just assume people, they may not be spending all their time thinking about the data that they're providing. I think we probably all could put up a hand and say, yeah, sometimes when I see a terms of use and I want that app, I just scroll down as fast as I can. Not to say that the lawyers even read all of that. It's usually that standard language. Some of the privacy commissioners and regulators have taken a pretty dim view of all of these policies and terms of use documents, and they say, listen, you can't have a 6,000 word document. People are just going to skim over it, if at all. They're not even skimming it over because they want to read it, but so they can get to that I agree button. So there's been a push. If any of you are building the tech, think about the ways in which you can be more privacy protective, more transparent, telling the story of the data. And not only, and it has to be a true story, but not all of the negative. See, if we don't embrace and take on the story of the data and the potential of the data and the reassurance that we have the right protections in place, we stand to do a couple of things. We will lose that trust. That person who is giving us data in exchange for something that they want. And they may just want to scroll down, click I agree, carry on. Why are we having this conversation about data and trust and everything else? But there is a story to be told for the average person in the public, and this is just my guess. They see a lot of negative. They pick up a newspaper, they log in to social media, and the stories aren't great. Think of all of the cyber situations that we've seen over the past few years through COVID, for example, couched in, hey, we're going to stop hacking healthcare, for example. This is what went on to Twitter and other social media platforms early in the pandemic. Remember how everybody posted their own, we're very sorry about COVID and we're going to, continue and support our staff and our customers and everything else. Everybody had their statement, and we had hackers putting up their noble statements saying, we're probably going to stop hacking healthcare and other sensitive areas. I'm not sure that it lasted very long. So again, what is the positive story about the data that a company can put out there? And that positive story is, look at all of the opportunities. What happens if we don't take this step? And we're going to talk about use cases where we choose how do you even vet use cases? What is the best use of our possibly limited time in machine learning and training those models and moving on and adopting AI? But I would love to change the narrative in the public so that what is seen is true, and it's not just the negative story about people going rogue with the data, cyber breaches, privacy breaches, things that are just, they're true and they're negative. But I would think that companies should be creating their own narrative about the tremendous amount of data that they hold and the potential that is in the data, and this exciting technology that can actually literally change the world. Now, that's extremely dramatic, but it's a fact. So again, consider always there is a person who gives that data. They likely get something in return that they want. Is it a fair transaction? Well, maybe, but that's assuming that the company or organization has done it appropriately. So let's always just keep that in mind in those discussions. I've already mentioned, what is the company's risk appetite? It's absolutely essential if you're going to shape as a company your data governance and how you may consider adopting machine learning and artificial intelligence. What is the strategy that we want to apply to this? So I've characterized a few different kinds of organizations. So again, some of you may be in an organization or looking at some point to be working in an organization and considering how this happens internally. Others may be thinking about building the technology and going off to sell it or to provide that service. So I'm just trying to situate, again, it's that mindset. Think back to that global CIO. I'm scared to do anything. I'm scared to do nothing. And quite often right now, when ML and AI initiatives and vendors come knocking on the door, organizations just step back and they say, well, it's really exciting. It could transform, in my case, clinical care. It could improve the system. But I don't think we're ready. We don't have basic data governance. We don't know where our data is. We don't know what the quality of the data is. We haven't really thought it through. We haven't sort of taken a stand. Others will just push through and go from there. So I've said there are a few different kinds of organizations. So under the radar, as I mentioned, the watch and wait approach. What's everyone else doing? Let's just hang back a little. Nothing wrong with it, but it's just good to understand. And if you're selling something, you need to know, it's, they always say in marketing 101, you've got to know what objections a client or potential customer will bring forward and be ready with that. So again, some are going to be more comfortable under the radar, watching and waiting. Some will move forward as long as some others and their peers are doing it, thinking that there's safety in numbers. Now, from a legal perspective, it's always possible that one group gets singled out, right? And I sound like my mother saying, well, just because so-and-so did it doesn't mean you should have. Safety in numbers only goes so far, but regulators sometimes look to the entire sector to think, okay, where are we as a sector? Leading edge and not afraid to take risks, but we've put in responsibly. So in our ICC, the Inc. Consulting Corporation, our consulting arm, our tagline is innovate, responsibly. So we want that innovation to happen. And again, there's that baseline due diligence. Let's be responsible in doing it, but we're not going to not do it. Terrible grammar. And then I said, flying by the seat of your pants, an organization or company. And I mean, this would not be unknown to any of you as to some of the big groups that are just the break rules, fix things later. Again, I think if you're going to provide technology or provide a service or both to companies, or if you are internal to those companies, you've got to get a sense of this. And I watch really carefully, and I do move around from one organization to another every now and then in this kind of role. So having just come into a major teaching hospital, I'm just getting back up to speed as to risk appetite and what do we want to do with the data. But again, I still think that there's an opportunity for companies to not break things, but to lead and to take a stand and prioritize data. So I think there's a huge business opportunity, whether it's a nimble small company or a large multinational. The multinationals arguably have some challenge just in the terms of we say that privacy is the baseline and the entry point, but when you're dealing with different regulations across multiple jurisdictions, it can also be challenging. You've got lots to do. Okay, so consider within that organization or company, well, what's the opportunity of this data? What is the cost of stepping into the fold and actually doing it versus watching others go forward? And this is, again, a conversation that sometimes at a senior management table, sometimes it is headed to the board. It often comes because someone who's enterprising, again, approaches someone within the organization and says, hey, I can actually transform some of your business processes. Again, in my world, maybe it's a clinical improvement and you'll get a physician who is extremely excited about this. Listen, we can actually transform this. But then there's a quid pro quo about that other company's access to the data or figuring out what hat they'll wear. One of the questions generally, do we have to build internally this data science advanced analytics functionality, or can we acquire it? As I said, I think there'll be a lot of emerging options as well, because a lot of companies are not going to build it from the ground up, or sometimes they'll say, well, we'll get a data science person in, and they end up with a very small group, and then there's turnover. So some will actually make it a huge priority and really staff it up and commit to a longer term plan. In some cases, they'll say, well, maybe if we just had 1 or 2 people, it'll be fine. And maybe that's a start. I'm not suggesting it isn't. So I've said, is the organization or company open to investing resources, people, time, money? And there just has to be this analysis, which is why I'm all about this roadmap. We've developed sort of a continuum, which I'm not going to spend time on here, of privacy ready, cyber ready, AI ready. So we called it the readies because it's all part of that continuum to get to the point where you can harness that data and get on with the innovation. Okay, who in the internal team should we be looking to? Who's actually making the decision? Sometimes it's just off the side of the desk, to be frank. Who is turning their mind to all of these issues and not just in the day-to-day? So wearing a legal and privacy hat, which I do often, sometimes it's what's the expression about the fire hose? Like you're just putting out fires, and probably I'm mixing a few different expressions there. You're just putting out fires. And so how is it within an organization that they prioritize sitting down and turning their minds to it, getting the right people in the room? And that's one of the things that we did with Canary, this risk assessment tool for AI, because we said, you could have meeting after meeting after meeting, and then people go away, and then we come back and we're having the same conversation and we're not advancing. And we wanted to cut through and figure out through a series of questions, just to consolidate it and get the feedback of everyone and have everyone hearing the other. Because one of the challenges in companies is sometimes you get 6 people in the room and they all have a different vision, or they'll tell you operationally, you know what, when you said that out loud, that isn't what we do with our data. We haven't done that in 3 years. That came out of the agreement with the vendor. It came off the table. So it's just to get the right group to have the conversation as to how we want to harness this technology. I said, is the house in order? Often it's not. Who in the organization gets to bring data issues forward? One of my organizations that I love, Unity Health Toronto, so it's, again, large teaching hospital here in Ontario, is doing amazing things. They looked it in the eye, made a commitment led by Mohammed Mamdani, their VP Data Science and Advanced Analytics. We're going to build, we are going to create a team of data scientists, people who can analyze the data. We're going to do data governance, which they did more broadly as an organization. And one of the things they committed to is anyone can bring data issues forward. And then there'll be a vetting of, okay, that's an important issue to address. What are the problems that need solving? And let's get creative. Let's ask everybody. Let's not just ask board CEOs, senior teams, CFOs. Let's ask the people who are actually working in the data, or they bump up against an issue. If only we could speed up this thing or improve this other thing. So there has to be a forum. It doesn't mean that every issue will get the full attention and the solution, but let's just crowdsource. So just moving ahead, I numbered a few things. What data? What data do we have? Find it. And that sounds straightforward, but it isn't always. We sometimes find with companies, we've got data all over the place. We might have one central repository, let's say for client data. Maybe we have one central system, and then we have over 100 other systems. Some of them are legacy systems. For the longest time, the struggle was, oh, look, we've got data trapped in legacy systems. Can we harness it? Can we make sure that it's usable? I think over time, it's also morphed into, oh, do we still have that system? what's the status? From a cyber point of view, that's a little worrisome, isn't it? If we pour all of our attention into a main system that holds the data, and suddenly, we get hit through a legacy system that we weren't paying attention to. So find it, document it, map it. What is the basic due diligence? We can't protect that data, much less harness it for innovation and make sure we're compliant along the way. Entry point of privacy and cyber and security, I should say. Can't protect it, and we can't harness it for innovation if we don't know where it is. The second one, of course, is data quality. And there might be other terms that we can use. Is the data usable? What is the data? Where is it? Who's holding it? Is it secure? Is it compliant? Is it helpful to us? I mean, I don't need to get into the legal aspects of retaining stuff that we don't need. I think a lot of data hoarding goes on, whether sort of intentionally or not. Some people want to hold data long after it has any utility to us. So really, what is the process to make sure that we found it, we've documented it, we can start thinking, okay, let's get excited about what it could be. Let's make sure that it's usable, and then we have the right resources again to get it to a point where it can function and assist us. Back to who is going to get the job done. What are the internal resources? And again, to the extent that some of you are not in the company and not looking at it through that lens, consider if you are developing a product, for example, or a service related to data. The narrative and how you put that forward is going to be extremely important in understanding that dynamic. We spent some time when we were developing Canary thinking about, well, who's our target, even within an organization? Who makes the decisions about technology and data? And furthermore, who's paying the bill? Who gets to make these types of decisions? So again, do you have in-house capacity? This company should be asking, is there a service that you can obtain as a one-off, for example? I've heard companies talk about whether or not they should build their own internal advanced computational capacity. I mean, there are resources out there. I mean, they can be quite costly by times. And so that's a huge decision within an organization. Are we going full on in and I guess the business decision is, do we have to do that? Or are there other peer groups that could do this type of thing? And again, from an advanced analytics, data science capacity, do we have to bring people in? Can we retain groups that do this? And then on to one area that I didn't include and probably should have made a brand new bullet is just even thinking about how a company procures the technology. I mean, sometimes the procurement process, companies don't necessarily know what to be asking some of you. Maybe they generally know they need to be diligent, but they haven't really fleshed out when they're going out to procure technology. And again, many companies have very sophisticated procurement systems, but some of this is new. We haven't been procuring for AI systems for decades. So again, considering what's the due diligence internally for a company that is excited and wants to take advantage and incorporate AI into their business model, how do they know? How do they know whether what you're bringing forward is robust? Is it diligent? Are we asking for threat risk assessments and privacy impact analysis and successes that you may have had somewhere else? The testimonial, can they go and talk to any of your other customers? Part of this is also building your own narrative. If you're the one offering the technology and the service around data, to know how to put your best foot forward, because that, I'm sure, is closer to what lands clients. Okay, I don't have a whole lot more to say, but let me just whip through a few more things. Again, I think I've said 3 times now, privacy and security are the entry point. I'm going to just assume, and it's no small feat to get there. We have a lot of groups revisiting their strategies, again, revisiting compliance, coming out of bad breaches, whether it's a privacy breach and an internal error or an internal rogue person, or we didn't protect the data. Again, go back to my first slide on the public trust. It can be really hard. Even now, you can probably all think of a company that had a bad breach. And the minute you say the name of that company, everyone goes, oh, right. Well, I wonder how that's going. Sometimes those groups go on to really be the best companies around privacy and data because they took such a hard hit. But it's sometimes hard to come back and get that trust again. And to the extent that we're getting into emerging technologies, facial recognition, geolocating, I mean, that's not really emerging, it's here, but it's all of these choices. It's definitely worth it. So you have to be compliant as a baseline, of course. I've already said we need a more compelling story to tell and to get away from all of the negativity, which, I'm not saying it's unreasonable that people would be upset if there's a cyber attack, for example, and then we find out, well, we didn't really do as much as we should have in terms of the diligence and, the patches and the training of the people as well. Boards sometimes ask, as I said, like, could it happen to us? And I'm pretty sure sometimes CEOs look at me and think they're channeling, don't say yes, don't say yes. But of course, the answer is, well, we're taking all of the steps that we can to protect. I never use the word insure as a lawyer because there's really no such thing as a 100% guarantee, but we're being diligent. We are layering our efforts around privacy, around security. And to be fair, sometimes it just feels like a chore. And of course, if you get this right, then you're on to, getting away from just the compliance and into the exciting data use and the innovation as well. So back to the use cases just for a moment. Once we get to that stage and we've done that baseline and already you're thinking about how either your company or, your company that has the data or your company, as you're building the innovation tools is going to look at it, how does that organization get to the use cases? And, that's kind of the fun part. That's the thing. We've said already, think about that client, that consumer, that patient, depending on what sector you're in. What can we do for them? That's your baseline question. That's what that company should be thinking of. That's what, if you are the one creating the technology, what is that problem we want to solve? We just came through a 6-part series, my law partner, Ira Pargi, and I, on privacy for the future. And because she is also practicing in California and New York as part of their bars, we were talking about cross-border data flows. We were talking about all of the modernization of the legislation. We were talking about clinical research and these kinds of things. But we said we're going to do a bonus 7th session on AI in healthcare. And what are the use cases? What are the big problems that we literally think can be solved using machine learning and AI? And it's so exciting. So one of the things that this group, Unity Health Toronto, which is St. Michael's Hospital, is doing a ton of really cool stuff with AI and the data analytics. One of the things that they did was they created the vetting. And they said, listen, again, this is a healthcare example, and I know that you're not all in healthcare, but what they said was, if we figure this out, if we start to generate use cases, if patient outcomes improve, of course, that's priority 1. If we can enhance something in the system, that's also good. Maybe that's priority 2. If you can bring forward machine learning and AI as a solution where both the patient outcome improves and the system issue, and it could be something really simple. the system issue is also improved and it frees up nursing time or whatever it is. Could be any example that you can think of. That's what rises to the top as priority number one. So regardless of sector, just be considering, brainstorm, what are the problems that need solving? Some of them are going to be simple. Go to the people who live it because they probably have a great big long list. If only we could improve this. Okay, well, that one's not amenable to machine learning and AI, but there may be many that are. And then, of course, what protections would need to be in place? We've said role-based access, privacy training, all of those things that in some ways are boring and they're back to the baseline. We negotiate third-party vendor agreements all the time and sort out. Quite often, third-party vendors are also then asking, what about the data? Can we have the de-identified version to improve our models or our business downstream? So that's that's probably a different data talk for a different day as well. I don't have to spend a lot of time here. You're all probably aware, of course, that legislative reform is highly needed. So when we drafted privacy legislation in Ontario years ago, it has served well. I think there sometimes is a mythology that the legislation is so far behind that it cannot address innovation. I'm not always sure that that's true, any more than the mythology that the privacy and legal people are always going to impede innovation. We used to hear that in clinical research sometimes. Legal and privacy are going to end science. And I think, no, you just need the right group of people who love data, want to see this get done, of course, in that diligent way. And we'll tell you when we think it's not diligent, frankly. But modernization is happening globally in terms of the legislation. As I've said, in Canada, we're watching very carefully. We've got a federal statute called the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act poised imminently to be amended. We think we will see autonomous decision-making rules set out. And then again, we're watching the US, Europe, China. We do this as part of Canary as well, because we want to make sure that it's absolutely iterative. So again, you can go and check out Canary. Would love your feedback at any point. It's built on Canada's algorithmic impact assessment. We took that set of questions, coded, weighted, built the platform to really say if an organization is going to adopt machine learning and AI, are we ready? Are we ready to do it? Can we run a particular use case through and figure out what are the positive impacts? So we wanted not just the negative impacts of AI, because you often have those at the ready. We wanted to also say, what can this enhance? So it's a tool that can eventually provide a report. Sometimes a good tool, for example, to be taking to the senior management and the board. It's iterative. So, if your score is not great because there are gaps, you improve and then you run it again. So it's just a sort of point in time assessment. So I think probably this is one of my last slides. I'm just saying, if you build it, they will come. If you are working, creating the technology, convince the company that you have your eyes not only on what the data could do for them, but keep in mind, they have that accountability. They have to maintain that trust. They want confidence in you, and they'll ask you for proof of it as to what have you done about, how did you consider privacy? How did you consider security? One of the things in cyber is it's downstream vendors sometimes that create the issues. So when we're negotiating contracts now, we're sometimes saying, vendor, tell us who are your subcontractors, where are they located? Not that the location is always the most significant issue. What protections do they have in place? Are we protected? I don't want to end on a whole thing about liability because that's just not fun either. But I'm all about what is the narrative that you would take to the company. I think there's a whole sort of coaching and orienting and understanding of the priorities of each of you, whichever, I don't mean side because I don't want it to be polarized, but if we're going to move it forward, there are certain things that, of course, a company is going to want to have in place as well. I did say in healthcare, for example, some of the vendors that we're seeing come in, they collaborate, and they become part of a research study, even as a pilot. That's one way through as well. And then my last one, again, this was just about healthcare settings. We always look to see, what are we trying to achieve? Is it for healthcare, research, QI, health planning and analytics? Those are all uses of data typically under legislation that can happen even without consent in some cases. I mean, not healthcare if it's a direct patient thing. Who are the players? Who are the third-party vendors? Who are those vendors, including some of your companies? Who are they to that other organization? Do we bind them in a way to say, you're actually acting for us? So again, you've got to do that within the legislation. I already mentioned the downstream consideration about how a third-party vendor might want to come and engage with you, provide the service, but then also hold some of the data de-identified and securely for their own business purposes. And I can tell you, this is where lawyers start to look at it really closely. Well, how do we know that you're not going to try to re-identify? I mean, our statute here in Ontario says there's a prohibition on attempting to re-identify, for example. But that's the hesitation. That's the, I'm scared to do anything, I'm scared to do nothing as well. So I've said, again, be part of a research study. And then just to close it, let's just dispel the myth that privacy and security stifle innovation. Those are baseline requirements, can't get around them. You can actually turn them to a business advantage to say, yeah, we're robust and diligent and actively involved. And then otherwise, if you don't get that in place, of course, privacy and legal may impede you. But I said I wouldn't end on a negative. And I see it's about 43 after the hour. I didn't say what hour in what jurisdiction. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, just maybe a comment about this legal and privacy hurting innovation. I think we as data scientists might sometimes tend to say that because,
yes,
like,
I agree.
lawyers start asking difficult questions like, okay, like who can access this data? What if this data is stolen? Like, what if this data is misused? And these are difficult questions to which we usually don't have answers, right? And then we need to figure out the answer, right? And then it kind of
Yeah.
slows this down. That's why it's good to actually have this discussion, right? Because like, what if data is actually stolen, right? It's not uncommon.
Well, it's not. So if you are developing something that you're selling to a company, they want to know that you have protections in place. And if those protections, and again, they'll probably ask for privacy impact assessment, threat risk assessment, analysis so they can weigh, do we go ahead with this or not? And then they're going to bind you under a contract to say, if that were to happen and there's a bad data breach sitting with the vendor, then at least they're covered, through your insurance. So one of the things I always look at in a contract, again, boring, but people have asked me before, when you run through a contract, what do you really go to? I always say governing law and jurisdiction, because I want to know if in the rare event that there's a dispute, where is that going to unfold? So if it happened in the US, for example, where the damages awards are very high. In Canada, we don't have, it could be significant, but we don't have, $100 million type breaches and outcomes and everything else. So I want to know governing law and jurisdiction. And then I go to the suite of, it's the, triangle of insurance. Does that company have insurance? Will they indemnify us for that type of data breach? Even up to their insurance. And then even beyond that, what's the point in having insurance and an indemnity if you have a limitation of liability clause, which many vendors put in that say, well, it's great, I'm offering you insurance, I'm offering you an indemnity, but by the way, look at Section 9 limitation of liability that says, I only owe you, if there's a breach, up to 1 year's worth of my fees. And so, sometimes that's $12,000 or whatever it is, could be anything, but it doesn't even start to, so we strike that out or we negotiate it out when we're in that. And we say, listen, go get insurance. And we say, give us whatever it is, X million in, what is it? What's that language? Per occurrence or in the aggregate, which caps it. But organizations are taking that really
Mhm.
seriously. So there you have it. Yeah,
Yeah,
only I
thank you.
could be talking about insurance indemnity and limitation of liability. It's such a sexy topic, and that's the non-sexy part.
Yeah. Anyways, so like you had a bunch of questions in the talk, right? Like how, like, or a framework, if you will, to think about like how, what are the questions we should answer. And I was wondering all this time, like how exactly we should, is there some sort of framework? Like how do we write down these answers? Should it be like a Word document, or like where do we put this, and how do we actually uh, like we answer all these questions, and what happens next? Like, do we start
Well, I
building
would
a
just take
team, or
some, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is part of what I'll probably do over the course of the rest of my career, because this is the piece that excites me. It's what do we just have to put in place so we can get on with the good stuff. But again, if you're selling a product, knowing that these are things that the organization needs to do, I'm always interested in how you can turn that into your own competitive advantage as you go forward. Because sometimes the two organizations, just the vendor and the company they're selling to, they just don't meet. So again, it's understanding what do you have to have in place, what does your customer, what's important to your customer. Of course, that's again marketing 101, understanding that they're going to need some assurance about the tech, not just the outcomes of the technology, which might be spectacular. And quite often with AI, like you're wanting to get in and get access to big data sets so that you can train the model, for example. And how do you convince that group to let you in to get that done? So again, you have to be thinking about what matters to them. What do they have to go and convince somebody else of? I was supposed to be down in Washington in April at IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and they have their conferences all over the world. So we attended the Toronto one. My law partners got hit with COVID, so we parked the Washington trip. But I remember, most conferences you've probably seen, they now include, here's a little cheat sheet that you should use to go and convince your boss that you should come to this conference. And this is exactly what we're saying. What's the cheat sheet that helps you in your marketing, that takes into account the business needs and what the person you're trying to convince is going to be pressed to convince the board or convince the CEO or convince an internal group that what you want to do is actually a priority of the organization. So you've got to get on that, again, whether you do it in an Excel or a Word version or whatever it is, it's strategic, I think, as a layer.
okay. I want to share my screen because there are a bunch of
Of course,
questions, and
let
I think it
me
will be
stop sharing.
easier for you if I just, not just read, but also you
Of
maybe
course.
you see it. Okay, so then I think this question was asked even before you started the actual presentation. It
Okay.
was like the intro. So what do you mean when you say that the solution may not need to be built from scratch? I think this comes to the very beginning when you were introducing the talk, but also over
Yeah.
the course of the talk, over the course of the presentation, you mentioned like about, I guess, building versus buying the analytical function in the
Yeah.
organization. So yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So my comment is, again, organizations sometimes think, okay, we better get on this data thing. We better think about our data governance. And again, what do we have? Where is it? And everything else. The point at which we're moving into the data analytics, we want to consider machine learning and AI. Do we hire people and bring them in-house as employees? Is that going to be a branch of the company? It probably should be in a way. Or are we not there yet? Are there other groups externally, including some of you, who could provide that service? You could be engaged to provide the service rather than building a whole sort of team of data scientists and advanced analytics groups. And so that was a comment I made about Unity Health. they made it a priority. They have an exceptional team of data scientists, and they're able to do the advanced analytics. But that, in the sort of sphere of the health sector, not every organization is going to say, yeah, we're going to make that a priority in-house. And so again, if some of you are available in offering services or technologies that can do some of this, you might encounter someone inside that company that you want as a customer saying, well, just tell about it and we'll just go and do it ourselves. And I'm not sure that that's always the solution. And again, it's just one example, but sometimes they'll hire a person, not a team, and that person cannot get the same traction. So great. I think if a company has the resources and they make it a priority to create a department of, the people who do this well, more power to them. But there's also a role for, the group that's not in-house that can provide the service. And again, because we are where we are right now with data science, with ML, with AI, it's still quite new to a lot of companies as well. So some of you may have an opportunity to just sort of build out, not just what are you doing with ML and AI, but again, what's that narrative? What is that service? What is that technology? What's that package that you could offer as well?
Yeah.
Oh, that next one is good too. Can I just carry on with that one?
Yeah, maybe just read it out loud and then.
Yeah, so it says, if you get the house in order, because one of my questions was, is the house in order? And to me, that's again, that end-to-end, the readies. Do you know where your data is? Can you use it? Are you compliant with privacy and security? Are we ready for machine learning and AI? What is the innovation? What is the problem we're trying to solve? So let's assume that we say, listen, we think the house is in order. We've done some of that diligence. The question here is, how do you make it effective in the internal team pipeline so you don't just spin? Remember I said, oh, listen, well, we were here 3 months ago and you sat here and he sat there and so said such and such, and we're not advancing it. So again, it's that spiral, where we just don't move something forward. I actually think the organization needs to, it probably happens in a couple of ways. It has to be top down, but bottom up as well, so that people know it's a priority. And we don't want it to just be a one-off where we go, oh, we're going to take this on, but then 9 other things happen. And sometimes we get the IT team in an organization that, they're happy to be part of it and they do want to be part of it. And there's a whole other thing that we can talk about ensuring that the IT group is central in these decisions. But from their perspective, occasionally, we'll just be like, we can do that. Of course we can do that. But with the team that we have, this means that 5 other high priority items for this organization, in my world, like healthcare, IT, clinical informatics solutions, may need to be paused. So I think there's a socializing and there's an engagement. This is why we wanted to even work on Canary to try to cut down the time and bring that group together to get some answers so we don't have all of those meetings and everything else. So I think this question is exactly right. There's a socializing that has to happen, and then the company has to kind of back that it's a priority in a measurable way. I don't mean like, your job accountability, but it has to be clear that this is a priority, because how else do I free myself from everything that is expected of me? Do you want to move on to this next one about the story where the data was stolen? What did the data say?
Yeah, like maybe you have some
The data
stories.
scientists did wrong. I'm thinking of other vendors, for example. The one that always comes to mind is, it was called Ripple. Geez, I want to say Ripple 20. I think it was not Ripple 10. But if you Google Ripple 20, all one word, capital R, it was a downstream sub vendor.
Like this
It
one,
was
right?
a piece of technology, maybe just put in breach. Let's see if it, yeah. So Internet of Things, suddenly we've got a downstream vendor offering a certain piece of technology somewhere in an IP stack, cross-sector, global cross-sector. Who is this group that suddenly in the health sector? This is why I perked up right away, because they were suggesting that with the Ripple 20 breach and this problem in the downstream stack, this is why I talked about procurement. Does everyone know who the downstream vendors are? And if there's a problem, how do we cut it off? And in this case, what was reported was that in healthcare, it was impacting all kinds of systems and infrastructure. But in healthcare, it opened the door to medical devices being remotely controlled in a
Wow.
healthcare setting. So that, that gives me pause, right? But it was global. So again, it's a good example. It doesn't mean that it was the data scientists per se. I mean, there are lots of questions. We can come back another day and I'll bring Carol Piovesan with me to talk about, when you're building the AI and the transparency and because AI is being used for a lot of decisions that impact people. This is one of the things that we thought about with Canary. We need to actually say, is this in a kind of green zone where there's a problem we want to solve and we can set it and forget it? Or I said, well, come back periodically and check it. Is it sort of in that middle range, or is it a high risk autonomous decision system that is going to impact people? There are cases where, the AI tool was able to assess, well, who gets bail. So these are real life decisions as well. Let's also just take a look at that last one. What are some easy first steps to take to move toward privacy preserving models? I mean, I would get the baseline, whether you're building, know what the requirements are. Make sure that you've got the security built in from minute one. We, often work with Dr. Ann Kavukian, who was our former Information Privacy Commissioner. You'll know her as the person who created the concept of privacy by design. And then we worked with her more recently on trust by design and building from minute one. Nothing more frustrating for anyone, of course, to build something and then have to rebuild it. And, we didn't think about consent, or we didn't think about security, and we've got to build it a third time. So know your market, know what the rules are for your group, and start to turn this sort of to the strategic competitive advantage. Privacy, no, we have that in hand. We can show you how we have it in hand. Same thing for security as well. Like, again, you're trying to anticipate what will someone be worried about. And it's not always the things that you think it may be, but they're going to press you on that as well. And particularly if you ever end up in a procurement stream where they have to go to market in order to look at you and your competitors, what's the competitive advantage you have over the other? Like, again, this should be sort of basic and easy point of entry, but it is a differentiator sometimes, because that's, if they have a bad breach or a cyber attack based on your tech, it's never good. On that happy note.
Yes, I know you have
right.
another meeting.
I actually have got to
ahead.
fly to another meeting, so I'd better go.
Yes, I know. So thanks a lot for being with us, for doing this, and
Yeah.
so just go and talk to you soon.
Perfect.
Bye.
Thank you so much. I will log out and hope to join you again. Thanks.
Yes. Goodbye, everyone. Bye. Just need to figure out how do I stop it. Okay, I think I'll just end the meeting.